Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and his tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the UFO phenomenon my whole life.
And my name is Chuck. I'm an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
We started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed Navy video of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that the government has admitted that UFOs are real.
Or at least that the videos were authentic.
It raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
Right? And they may still be unlikely. There's so many explanations for these stories, even if the truth is more mundane than we're hoping. If any of this turns out to be true,
woo! It's a very exciting time. Oh my God. Chuck, I thought we were going to wait until the weekend to record.
Yeah, me
I don't
too.
know why I thought that. I watched the recap of the hearing and I'm like, okay, nothing huge happened for people who are up to date on it.
Right.
And then yesterday, the day after the hearing, I was looking at our podcast analytics and they were through the roof.
Yeah.
Like, good Lord.
Yeah.
And the only thing I can conclude is that people are searching for Grusch
Super excited
and stuff. And, they were finding our podcast, but
yeah.
I was a little worried that they were listening to our, there's going to be a hearing podcast. And I'm like, oh boy. So
right.
My coworker is always giving me grief. He listens to a bunch of news podcasts and they refer.
This is your boss, right?
He hates it when I call him my boss. Hey, Jason. How you doing, boss man? But he was like, oh yeah, these news podcasts I listen to, they refer to that as an emergency pod. So he was texting me yesterday. He's like, are you guys going to record an emergency pod?
Oh, emergency podcast. Yeah. Okay, I love it. Yeah.
So anyway, we're here with an emergency pod. But before we get started, Chuck's got a quick announcement.
Hey, yeah, I do. We have a Patreon. After a couple people have asked us about it, we made it. You can find it at patreon.com. Yes, a couple people and your wife. You can find it at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime. You totally don't have to back Patreon. We want to keep this free. But I accidentally bought some pro level audio equipment, and it turns out to be way more expensive than I had intended. I am buried under XLR cables, and anyways, totally appreciated, but absolutely okay if you don't back it.
We would love it if anybody out there wanted to support us, but don't feel any pressure. All right, so I spent a few hours last night pulling together the notes for today. And I sent them to Chuck ahead of time so he could kind of skim over them. And he left all these comments like, delete this, get to the UFOs, man.
Get to the UFOs.
And we're going to. Don't worry. There's plenty here. But there are a few noteworthy things that were said by the Congress people themselves that are worth discussing. And they kind of set the context for the hearing as a whole. So I want to go over a few of these quotes. First of all, Representative Grothman kind of kicked the whole thing off. This is the opening statement. And he said, the lack of transparency regarding UAPs has fueled wild speculation and debate for decades, eroding public trust in the very institutions that are meant to serve and protect them. I really liked this. It is a very succinct way of phrasing something that I've been hearing across the board. It's really interesting that when Congress people talk about why this topic concerns them, there are a few things they bang on about. And we've talked about flight safety as kind of an easy way for them to ease into the topic. No. I don't care about aliens. I don't believe in UFOs, but something's up there and it's a problem.
Yeah, but there's more to it than that.
But this is increasingly another thing we're hearing. We saw it a lot in Schumer's language around his disclosure bill. And we're hearing it again here that, hey, the government has, if they haven't outright lied, they have at least been incredibly non-transparent about it. And it has caused a lack of faith. And they're setting up to try to course correct. I think that's really, really important that they're acknowledging that and putting that front and center. Representative Garcia also made a really good point. He said, some folks might wonder why we are asking questions that might already be out there or have been asked before. It's important that they're asked and put into the public record as it relates to this committee. It's also important that our friends in the media engage and do independent investigation and report.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think those two quotes are really lovely. And like, I know there was a lot at the beginning of the event, but I think they do a really good job of setting context for why this event exists at all. I appreciate them talking about the lack of transparency causing like real tangible problems. And then Representative Garcia talking about like kind of lending their authority to the witnesses and helping ensure that it's covered by media outlets. I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, totally. And, not to tip my hand too much, but we'll talk about the reaction hearing a little bit later. But there's been a lot of mainstream media coverage of this. We've heard from the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, NPR, The Guardian, news.com.au, Time. Like, the coverage isn't always as in-depth as we'd like. And I would say if you had to kind of pick a vibe check for the media as a whole, the vibe check is less, aliens are real, and more, Congress sure is taking this UFO topic seriously, which is fair. I think that's where a lot of members of the public are. Like, the fact that Congress is taking it seriously is both news to most people and also kind of shocking given the last, 50, 60, 70, 90 years, depending on how you count this. Like, this has been a very dismissive topic, especially for Congress people. To have them coming out and asking really pointed questions and taking it seriously, for those of us in the community, it's really refreshing. But for people outside the community, it's like, wait, why are you, what?
Yeah. Does it feel like validating that you've been like working on this for so long and Congress is finally taking it seriously?
I don't know if you could describe what I do on this as working, but yes, I've been really interested in it, and it is gratifying to see the government stepping up and taking it seriously, which is something I believe they should have been doing the whole time. And I will eternally be grateful to Big Daddy Lou Elizondo, Chris UFO Daddy Mellon, and all the rest of them for kind of setting the tone with Congress and going in and going, easing them in with flight safety issues. And, hey, whatever you think about this, there's unknowns up there, and shouldn't we be asking questions? And they did this. They paved the way for us to get to this point. Is this capital D disclosure? No. Is this the start of it? Yeah, I think you could make a really, really convincing case of that.
Seems like it.
So the media's reaction right now feels very appropriate to what we're hearing. Like, hey, they're making some wild claims, but nobody's laughing them out of the room.
Yeah, that's true. That's great.
There's another point on here. This is one of the ones Chuck wanted me to cut. I think it's important to note. Representative Garcia later on said, this is by far the most bipartisan conversation and discussion that I've seen happen in the Congress. I know that feels like kind of a nothing statement, but I have heard this across the board. Bryce Zabel on the Need to Know podcast with Ross Coulthart said he has a buddy who watches C-SPAN hearings, and he asked him about it, and he's like, it was remarkable. Like, usually these hearings are just a lot of sniping, right? If they ask questions of the witnesses, the questions are calculated and targeted in such a way to make their opponents look bad, right? The point of the hearing is to humiliate your opponents, not to actually do the hearing. You did not see that here. We had bipartisan, Congress people from both sides asking really intelligent questions. There was, as far as I could tell, like no tension, no like pointed comments. There was only one politician who I'll talk about later who kind of did, she was here to get her moment in the spotlight, but everybody seemed to be taking it really seriously, and we're all on the same side, which, is remarkable in today's current atmosphere.
Yeah. And So I just looked it up. Garcia, I think this is their first term.
Yeah.
So
he said, no, I've only been here 7 months, but this is the, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So there was a bunch of stuff in here with Tim Burchett talking about, pushback and everything. But frankly, we covered that pretty heavily in the last episode. So, feel free to check that out if you haven't. But there was one thing that I wanted to hit here. Representative Luna said, we were denied access to a classified briefing in a SCIF prior to this hearing. A SCIF is a sensitive compartmented information facility. My understanding is that's a fancy word for a room with a guard where you can talk privately.
That's the secret box.
Like, I want to think of it as like, oh, we've got this like hardened bunker with a Faraday cage, and I'm sure those do exist, but I don't think that's always what they're talking about.
I really hope that they have like a fake skeleton in there so they can be like, oh, that skeleton's in that closet.
Yeah. So she said, we were denied access to a classified briefing in a SCIF prior to this hearing due to the amount of hoops that we had to jump through to grant temporary clearance to witness Grusch, who has knowledge of classified information.
Okay. I don't understand the grammar here.
That's fair.
They were denied access due to the amount of hoops?
Yeah. So this is me interpreting, but you're totally right.
Okay.
She phrased that very oddly. Through context later in the hearing and from what we're hearing, my understanding is they requested a SCIF so that they could receive classified information from Grusch, and they were denied. And I think when she says the number of hoops, what she means is they weren't flatly denied. They were just given so much stuff they had to do to qualify for it that it was effectively impossible. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't have the details. I don't know what the normal process is for requisitioning it. As we talked about in the last issue, there is a possibility that Burchett and Luna have perhaps overestimated the amount of information that they deserve to be privy to, which they also talked about in this later. I didn't include the quote, but like Representative Matt Gaetz was asking, like, is there anything above top secret? And Grusch was like, well, no, but this is like, there's a bigot list. And anyway, it's complicated, but I think it's worth noting in the context of Burchett and Luna especially have been very clear that they've been getting a lot of pushback from the Pentagon in particular and the intelligence community about this topic. And when they go to try to do things, they are encountering resistance, foot dragging, and outright like obstacles thrown in their way. They presented this as that's what it was. Maybe we'll find out tomorrow, Congressman Comer comes out and is like, what are they talking about? They just didn't fill out the pink form and, right. But it does fit with the overall narrative we've been hearing that at the very least, the Pentagon is not making it easy for Congress to do their job on this topic.
Sure. Makes sense.
We got a banger of a quote from Representative Moskowitz. We've kind of touched on this idea before, but I think he phrased it really well. He said, the American people ask themselves, how come when a Russian jet shoots flares at one of our drones, we have perfect pictures and video to show the American people and the world, but when it comes to UAPs, nothing. Of course, we must always protect our national security, but we cannot allow that to be used as a shield to keep the American people completely in the dark from basic truths. The American people deserve to hear more about SAPs, special access programs. Congress has a right to know if there's any unsanctioned weapons development, satellite imagery that has not been provided to Congress.
Wow. That is a banger of a quote. You were right. So obviously neither of us knows anything about this, but do you think that the military PR department, like I don't even know what that is, but do they just not see the value of declassifying and sharing this info, or
So
Because it's got to be just, yeah.
I'm going to pull a quote from later up a little bit here. So,
okay.
Ryan Graves later on gave a quote. He said, "My understanding is that all UAP videos since 2021 are classified secret or above, which prevents the American people and even some members of Congress from seeing UAP videos. Now, there are certainly some national security concerns when we use our advanced sensors and our tactical jets to be able to identify these objects. However, there's no reason that the objects themselves should be classified." So if I understand it right, what's happening is just that there is a blanket secrecy over anything that touches UAPs. So the difference between this and the Russian jets dumping fuel and firing flares at that drone a few months back is Russian jets aren't secret. So they were able to, scrub the sensitive bits of the picture out. Well, we don't care about their secrets.
Oh, I guess that's a good point. There's advantage in breaking their secrecy.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Exactly. So the things that would be sensitive in a video taken by a drone is things that give you insight into how the drone itself operates. That's why when you get those videos, there's parts of it that are blurred out and stuff. And like, oh, you can't see like what's the little bit of metadata on the screen and stuff.
Right.
But they're clearly capable of doing that, in the context of something like a Russian jet. So why are UFOs different? If, as the Pentagon keeps saying, there's nothing extraterrestrial here, there's nothing to worry about, why is it all classified? And as he points out, since 2021, this is a recent change. So I don't know, man. It's a weird thing. And I think Moskowitz hit the nail on the head when pointing out, like, this is a strange contradiction. And as Congress, we deserve to understand what the difference is. And he hints at, again, we see Congress people don't tend to use language lightly. He says, are there unsanctioned weapons development programs?
Yeah.
Is there satellite imagery that has not been provided to Congress?
Probably.
That, incidentally, is a claim we've also heard from Chris Mellon, that satellite imagery has been withheld. Why would they withhold satellite imagery? Well, maybe it shows crash locations. Maybe it shows retrieval operations. Maybe it shows vehicles. We've heard about like football field size vehicles.
Right.
Those would be visible in satellite imagery. So I don't know, man. As always, we don't have enough information.
Yeah.
We're doing Kremlinology here, and, inferring and interpreting what everyone says. But I do think we've got a pretty good track record of seeing when Congress puts up a what if, that's not usually a completely, hypothetical. That's founded in something, usually.
A quick question, with classification. Is it like classified, then secret, then top secret? Or
boy, do I not know the answer to that
okay,
question.
That's fine.
I am also confused by that. My understanding is there are fewer classification levels than you might think.
Okay.
There's only a handful of them. But a program itself can be restricted. That's the whole thing with special access programs and waived special access programs. So as I understand it, and I'm going to preface this by saying I don't know.
Okay.
A special access program is literally just a particular type of program that has restricted access. But it should still be on the books. It should still be in records. People should be able to look it up. You may not have access to it, but it's there. Congress, when they're doing their budget, can see program X is here and it cost us this much money. There's another category beyond that called waived special access programs.
Ooh.
And that literally means these programs are not included in the list. You have to know that they exist. You have to be read into them. And there is what's called a bigot list of the people who are authorized to know about this program. And the only thing is, my understanding is, people like Admiral Wilson, David Grusch, the Gang of Eight are supposed to be on those lists.
Okay.
Right? The whole thing with the CIA abuses in the Church Committee, what came out of that was the oversight committees and the idea that even the most secure, sensitive, top secret shit should still be told to the Gang of Eight, the eight
Yeah.
most senior members of Congress. They should still be allowed to know. And part of what Grusch is alleging here is this shit is being improperly concealed from Congress. Nobody's really objecting to the idea that some of this stuff should be secret. They're objecting to the fact that the people who are supposed to know aren't being told. So if this stuff exists, it's being improperly concealed.
Somehow I had never put it together that there was a difference between the Gang of Eight and the G8 summit.
Those are very different things. Yeah.
Very different. Yeah. Okay. Today I learned. Okay. And I also looked it up. There is classified, then secret, then top secret. And like you said, there's additional category tags you can put,
right?
Post-its you can put on this.
I like the idea of a tag system.
Yeah, right.
All right. So I'm going to stop embarrassing myself by talking out my ass about classification levels that I know nothing about. We've got a couple more quotes that I want to get through, and then we'll get to the meat of the hearing. So first of all, this was actually a quote from fairly late in the hearing, but I'm pulling it up ahead because, again, I think it kind of sets the tone for how Congress is thinking about this. Representative Andy Ogles said, he asked some questions. This is after everyone else is gone. He was the last one. He said, okay, Mr. Chairman, there clearly is a threat to the national security of the United States of America. As members of Congress, we have a responsibility to maintain oversight and be aware of these activities so that, if appropriate, we take action. I would encourage the chairman to demand that we have any and all, but in particular Mr. Grusch, talk to us in a skiff. And if that access is denied, I will personally volunteer to initiate the Holman Rule against any personnel or program or agency that denies that access to Congress.
First, I appreciate that you said this came from the end of the thing, because this is that's a good summation. But what in the world is the Holman Rule?
I'm not even going to pretend that I knew this before I looked it up.
Okay.
The Holman Rule is a rule in the House of Representatives that allows amendments that would reduce the salary or fire specific federal employees or cut a specific program.
Wow.
So this is a direct threat.
Yeah, right?
Oh, you're going to deny us access to the secure facilities we need to do our job? Okay, you're fired and all of your subordinates are having their pay docked, right?
Wow.
This is a big deal.
That's big. Okay.
Yeah. So it just, again, I include this quote because I want to show these Congress people were not in there rolling their eyes.
Yeah.
They're taking it very seriously. They are very concerned that improper procedures have been followed at the very least. Let's not even talk about what it means that there might be UFOs and alien bodies. Right now, what we're talking about is information that is being improperly concealed from the public and specifically improperly concealed from Congress. And they are hopping mad about it.
Hopping mad. Okay.
Hopping mad. Yeah. All right. So my last quote here,
Okay.
this is the longest freaking quote. But Matt Gaetz came out and I waffled about whether to include this because basically he tells the same story that Burchett and Luna told about going to Elgin Air Force Base and trying to get a briefing about something. But he brought all of the details that Burchett and Luna only kind of hinted at. So bear with me, even if you listened to the last episode and you're familiar with the Elgin Air Force Base story, this is direct from the mouth of Matt Gaetz.
Okay.
Several months ago, my office received a protected disclosure from Elgin Air Force Base indicating that there was a UAP incident that required my attention. I sought a briefing regarding that episode and brought with me Congressman Burchett and Congresswoman Luna. We asked to see any of the evidence that had been taken by flight crew in this endeavor and to observe any radar signature as well as meet with the flight crew. We were not afforded access to all of the flight crew, and initially we were not afforded access to images and to radar. Thereafter, we had a bit of a discussion.
It's very
Remember
funny.
what Luna said?
Yeah.
She said we got in an argument.
Yeah.
We had a bit of a discussion about how the authorities flow in the United States of America. And we did see the image, and we did meet with one member of the flight crew who took the image. The image was of something that I am not able to attach to any human capability, either from the US or from any of our adversaries. And I am somewhat informed on the matter, having served on the Armed Services Committee for 7 years, and having served on the committee that oversees DARPA and advanced technologies for several years.
Wow.
When we spoke with the flight crew, and when he showed us the photo that he'd taken, I asked why the video wasn't engaged. Why didn't he have a FLIR system that worked? And here's what he said. They were out on a test mission that day over the Gulf of Mexico. I'm going to interject here for a moment. We were speculating last time, due to the timing, that this might have been one of the UFO shoot-downs back in February. It wasn't. None of those were in the Gulf of Mexico. So this is a different incident. Timing was just coincidental.
Okay.
They were out on a test mission that day over the Gulf of Mexico. And when you're on a test mission, you're supposed to have clear airspace. Not supposed to be anything that shows up. And they saw a sequence of 4 craft in a clear diamond formation, for which there is a radar sequence that I and I alone have observed in the United States Congress. One of the pilots goes to check out that diamond formation and sees a large floating, what I can only describe as an orb. Again, like I said, not of any human capability that I'm aware of. And when he approached, he said that his radar went down. He said that his FLIR system malfunctioned, and that he had to manually take this image from one of the lenses. It was not automated in collection, as you would typically see in a test mission.
Wow. What?
All right.
What even? Okay. So that's incredible. And I'm glad we got some additional details. But how in the world is he allowed to talk about that?
It's a really good question.
They couldn't share that with Luna.
Now, what I will say is, this is what I think a lot of people are kind of hoping will happen, is there's what everyone is legally allowed to say, and then there's what Congress people are going to say.
Yeah. What they think they can get away with.
We're all kind of hoping that people like Burchett are going to find out the truth, and they're not going to be able to keep their mouths shut. You've asked me before, like, would you want to know the secret? And I said no, because, we're assuming that if you found out, you would not be able to tell anybody. I'm like, I wouldn't be able to not tell anybody.
No.
Well, I feel like a lot of people in Congress are the same way, and I'm kind of hoping that although legally we, the public, are probably never going to see some of this stuff, maybe some of it comes out anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe that's it.
So yeah, wild story. I've done enough prefacing. As you can see, the main point I want to hammer on is just, again, Congress is taking this shit real seriously. There was no giggling. The Congress people were there. I don't want to get too into the politics of the whole thing, but this was actually a subcommittee of the House Oversight Committee, and Burchett and Luna and Gates and AOC were all there, none of whom are normally on that subcommittee. So they were there explicitly as guests, meaning either they were invited or they asked to be included. So we are not seeing, like we saw with Gillibrand's interview with Sean Kirkpatrick, earlier this year, where it was just her and 2 others and nobody else bothered to show up. This was a packed room in terms of the audience. There were a bunch of Congress people there. They used up 2.5 hours and everybody has timers, right? Like you only got like 5 minutes to ask questions, and everybody's going and like yielding their time back to Burchett and everything. So
wow,
this really felt like a big deal. It really felt like Congress is taking this very seriously, very credibly.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. I would love to know what happened. If there was any specific thing that really changed the tide between totally empty room a year ago and totally packed room today. And or yesterday. Was it Grusch? Was it I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. We've been hearing that Congress has been hearing from whistleblowers for over 2 years now.
Okay.
When we say Congress, usually what we actually mean is certain members of Congress, right?
Sure,
the
yeah.
intelligence committees, in particular, the Armed Services Committee, maybe. But the way that they're behaving, it sure feels like it's getting out, and
Yeah.
more of them are taking it seriously.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe just the critical mass, enough whistleblowers have come forward that it's like, God, this really is a thing.
Right. Well, and that's exactly what Chuck Schumer said in the write-up for his disclosure bill is, we have heard compelling testimony from many different witnesses across the government that compel us to take action.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So let's get into the reason we're here, right? There are 3 witnesses called. We've got 2 former Navy pilots, Ryan Graves and David Fravor. And then we've got the UAP whistleblower, David Grusch. Let's start out with Ryan Graves. So Ryan Graves, he had a quote at the beginning. He said, "It has been more than a decade since my squadron began witnessing advanced UAP, demonstrating complex maneuvers on a regular basis, and we still don't have answers. I founded Americans for Safe Aerospace to create a center of support, research, and public education for aircrew who are impacted by UAP encounters."
Wow, it's been a decade.
It has been a decade. The reason I wanted to include that quote is because I had heard he started this organization, but I didn't really know much about it. So first of all, this is leaning into the flight safety aspect of it. Hey, I don't know what UAPs are, but they're up there and our pilots are having to dodge them. That is, by any definition, a flight safety issue. And why aren't we collecting data about it? Why don't we have a standard reporting mechanism? Why is there such a stigma? He said they have over 5,000 members, and they are currently talking to over 30 witnesses to UAP encounters.
Okay.
So what was really interesting about Ryan Graves is he, more so than David Fravor, was brought in and positioned as an expert on the issue of flight safety and pilot reporting and stuff like that. So a lot of the questions that were directed at him were around that context. In his opening statement, he said, "There are 3 critical issues that demand our immediate attention and concerted action. 1, UAP are in our airspace, but are grossly underreported. 2, the stigma attached to UAP is real and powerful and challenges national security. And 3, the government knows more about UAP than is shared publicly, and excessive classification practices keep crucial information hidden." I think that's a really good overview of where you're at. If you're not ready to engage with the topic of aliens, this is kind of a summary of the safe way to talk about it, right? UAP are real. They're there. There's a real stigma attached to talking about it, which is posing a flight safety issue, and the government knows more, which is worsening the problem. So with his group, he's trying to challenge all 3 of those things.
Yeah.
Now, we have talked about David Fravor, who we'll get to in a minute. Ryan Graves, we briefly touched on. Ryan Graves was a pilot in the 2014 UAP incident off the East Coast involving pilots from the USS Roosevelt. So some of this we have heard before, but we haven't necessarily talked about it on the podcast. So one of the quotes that he had was, "UAP sightings became an open secret among our aircrew. They were a common occurrence, seen on radar and up close. The sightings were so frequent that they became part of the daily briefs." It was like talking about the weather. Like, there are UAP up there and you got to watch out for them, guys.
That is wild. Like, a part of the daily brief, like, I kind of had, I don't know, in my head, I was thinking like, this is something they saw every year or something. Because we only hear things about like 2004, 2017, like, but they're talking about it like daily.
And this is something that we've done a bad job of presenting. With the Nimitz, The reason they were tasked to investigate the incident, and we'll talk about that later, was they had been getting these unusual radar tracks for weeks. In our episode on the Nimitz, I talked about one of the radar technicians on the Nimitz we assumed it was a bug. We took the whole system apart, ripped it down to the ground and built it back up again to confirm that it wasn't a flaw in our system. It wasn't. It was just they had rolled out this new type of radar that was more powerful, and they were picking up signals that they hadn't seen before. We've heard similar stories from the East Coast. Now, that was 10 years later, so a different set of equipment and a different context. But again, they were talking about for weeks on end, they were having these encounters. They were seeing them in the air. So he talks about one particular incident, but there were many of them over a long period of time.
God, that's wild. Okay.
Yeah. He included a quick summary of what makes the UAPs unusual, which I really appreciate, right? Like, we've kind of absorbed this knowledge through osmosis in the community, but getting a nice succinct version of it to share with Congress is great. He said the UAP that we encountered and tracked on multiple sensors behaved in ways that surpassed our understanding and technology. They could accelerate at speeds up to Mach 1, hold their position against hurricane force winds, and outlast our fighter jets, operating continuously throughout the day. They did not have any visible means of lift, control surfaces, or propulsion. Nothing that resembled normal aircraft with wings, flaps, and engines.
The thing about, like, most of those things, I don't have any like context for. I am not a pilot, but hurricane force winds, like, I'm attached to the ground and I can't withstand those. So this like kind of brings it home that they're like, I don't know. That's wild to me.
Right. And every single one of the things he mentioned is bizarre, right? The acceleration we've talked about before, the G forces that these objects pull would turn a pilot into spaghetti. Holding your position against hurricane force winds. He's not just talking about like, oh, it's able to stay airborne. He's talking about there is a stationary object on radar.
Yeah, that's so wild.
At a certain altitude in high winds.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. If there's a stationary object out there, it's moving with the winds. So it's like, not a balloon, right?
Right, yeah. And it's like, it feels like they almost don't interact with the world or something, which is...
Yeah, totally.
I don't know.
And then, of course, the things we've talked about before, no flaps, no control surfaces, no propulsion. Like, every now and then we talk about the weird metallic spheres that Arrow is talking about. And people like to share. There are actually videos out there of people who have built drones that are spherical. But the thing is, you still have to have the fans somewhere. They have to interact with the air, and it still has to behave like a normal drone. It just happens to be spherical shaped. So even if you're like, oh yeah, well, we can build drones that are sphere. Okay, fine. But you still have to explain all the other things. Why doesn't it have an IR plume? Why is it able to hold its position perfectly still in a hurricane wind? All of these things taken together paint a bigger picture than any individual detail. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
Now, Graves described a few different incidents that are worth talking about. The first one is the Roosevelt incident. And the Roosevelt incident is where the Go Fast and Gimbal videos came from.
Okay.
So he described a training incident in 2014 where pilots needed to, as part of the training, needed to go through a single GPS point at a set altitude. So this is part of their workup, right? You need to go through this point. Two pilots saw, quote, a dark gray cube inside of a clear sphere, motionless against the wind, fixed directly at their entry point. They were forced to evade. They came within 50 feet of a collision and were forced to scuttle the mission.
Wow.
I've heard that story before, and I'm still like, hearing him summarize it down like that is shocking, right? Like, and it's a similar thing. We've talked about Fravor before, where there was this weird detail of like, you're never going to believe this. It's at your cap point. How did it know where your cap point is? Well, this is the same thing. Okay. There is the weirdness that there was a stationary object.
Yeah.
And they had to evade it. But the fact that that stationary object was at a particular point that was relevant to the mission is the weird thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
He goes on to describe a couple of other incidents. These were brand new, at least to me.
Okay.
First of all,
that's exciting.
He said Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who is the former head of NOAA and the like meteorologist for the entire Navy, received a classified email from his boss titled "Urgent Safety of Flight Issue," with the Go Fast video attached. The Go Fast video, again, from Ryan Graves's encounter, asking if anyone knew of their origin. So here's a rear admiral sending out a classified email through the system for communicating with, other admirals and such, saying, we've got a flight safety issue. What is this thing? Does anybody know?
Right.
The next day, the email was removed from his system. Now, this is where I'm going to point out, this is all me reading between the lines. I don't work in classified systems. I am not an admiral. How common is it that a classified email just goes missing? But everything about how he was telling this story made it clear this was unusual and unexpected. And even more weird than the email disappearing was no one talked about it. Like, it was just kind of understood. Like, nope, that never happened.
Yeah. It sounded like from the way that was described, it was sent by his boss.
Yeah.
Who would be a vice admiral.
Maybe. Yeah. Again, we'll talk about this a little more later. Not a military guy.
Yeah, totally.
I'm hazy at best on ranks and how they interact.
No, that's a good point. I don't know who their boss is. It's, and like we can imagine IT. Yeah, they delete stuff, but like, I don't know. You gotta have, I don't know. That's interesting. So
it's
some sort of like
I would love to find out more. Right? Like, when you're dealing with like the president, you're not ever supposed to delete anything. Does the same thing apply to classified systems involving generals? I don't know, So, but he brings this up as an unusual incident. So I am assuming that the context is that the fact that it disappeared from the classified system is the unusual part.
Yeah, makes sense.
He also shared another incident, which the community has been very excited by. This is the first time anybody had heard this. And he said he heard about this through his organization. So people have given him testimony about it. He described an incident in 2003 when a large group of Boeing contractors at Vandenberg Air Force Base saw a football field-sized red square approach the base from the ocean and hover over one of the launch facilities for about a minute before darting off over the mountains. And he said there were other similar events, including, quote, aggressive tactics, where these objects were approaching security guards at rapid speeds before darting away.
That shit is wild.
What?
Like, also, it's so weird that why are these so low poly? Like, why is it a red square? Like,
I don't know.
Did they just forget to render that or something? Right. I don't know.
It's a really weird story. It's very, very weird. All right. And we already talked about UAP videos are classified. But you had a note in here that I think was worth mentioning. So, Ryan Graves says, my understanding, all UAP videos since 2021 are classified secret or above, which prevents disclosure both to the public and Congress.
Yeah. So, I mean, that sounds a little bit like, is this what the new NDAA amendment was kind of getting at? The JFK style declassification?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and they talk about that in that. And in that episode, I left out a detail because I didn't understand it at the time, but Ross Coulthard has been harping on it. They talk about the fact that a lot of stuff has been improperly classified There is, I'm going to get this wrong, it's like transgressive classification, but basically it was classified under the Department of Energy as if it was foreign nuclear materials, which it is obviously not. And they were kind of abusing this because the DOE has kind of broad authorities to deal with atomic stuff. So yes, absolutely. We are hearing this claim across Congress that there is overclassification happening, and Schumer's amendment is directly addressing that. He wants the default stance to be this stuff is declassified by default, and you have to argue for why it should be classified, as opposed to just it had a UFO in it, so it's classified.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
P.S. We shouldn't be talking about this right now, but the NDAA passed the Senate today.
Hey, okay. So we're recording.
Now it still has to pass
Sunday,
the House, right? And the House is doing some weird stuff, and then the president has to sign it. But still.
So this wasn't in the House. The NDAA amendment that was in the Senate. I can't keep track.
Well, it has to pass all three, right?
Right.
So the Senate has the language initially, then it goes to the House. They vote on it.
Okay,
we'll see.
Okay.
And the last detail from Ryan Graves, at one point, one of the congresswomen asked him, what percentage of UAP encounters, both military and civilian, go unreported? And his response, he said, this is just a personal estimate, 95% go unreported.
That's like, that number is both shocking and unshocking at the same time. Like, to get to that number, it's got to be either so painful or so pointless, or both.
Yes. No, you've hit the nail on the head.
But still, 5% is actually kind of shocking too.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Well, and pilot is one of those jobs where if there's even a hint that you're mentally unstable, your license gets yanked. So pilots, maybe more so than any other industry, are extremely sensitive to anything that might jeopardize their ability to fly. And because this topic is so stigmatized, and he talked about that, he's like, I have heard from flight crews who have said it is understood the single best thing you can do is delete the video.
Yeah.
Like, it's better to delete the video than to come back and talk about it and have to deal with it.
I'm glad we're making progress on that. That's crazy.
Let's hope. Rolling over to the next Navy pilot, we've got David Fravor. Now, we have a whole episode on the Nimitz incident. If you're interested in it, I encourage you to go listen to it. So I'm going to just kind of gloss over this, but he described it in 2004 during a training exercise. He and his co-pilot were sent to check out a recurring radar track from the ship over the last 2 weeks. Quote, they had been descending from above 80,000 feet and coming rapidly down to 20,000 feet, would stay for hours and then go straight back up. When they arrived at the location, they saw a small white Tic Tac shaped object. And hilariously, he interjected at this point and he said, or if you're not familiar with what a Tic Tac is, a giant flying propane tank. Which I thought was super charming. Like, he's clearly been telling this story for years, and he's kind of learned not everybody knows what a Tic Tac is.
But if they don't know what a Tic Tac is, they definitely know what a propane tank is. What does that say?
Right.
No, never mind. I'm not asking that.
So he says they saw this white Tic Tac shaped object moving over a large disturbance in the water. I emphasize large because a lot of people think that means it was doing some sort of like rotor wash or something, but it was dramatically out of scale. He described in an interview that it looked like something massive had just gone under the water, and this thing was zipping around on top of it. He says, no rotors, no rotor wash, no visible flight surfaces like wings. And later, when someone asked, he mentioned that in infrared footage, there was also no IR plume like you would normally get from a propulsion system. He said it circled around with them, responding to them, before rapidly accelerating away, where it appeared at their cap point. The cap point is a combat air patrol point. It's literally just a point that you've agreed upon to rendezvous, either before or after the mission. So he said he got a call from the prince that said, you're never going to believe this. It's at your cap point. He said it traveled 60 miles in less than a minute, which is extraordinarily fast.
Yeah, that is.
And then he said, what is shocking is that the incident was never investigated. None of my crew were ever questioned. The tapes were never taken. I know. Yeah,
I don't know how to respond. That's wild.
Both Fravor and Graves kind of made this point that the problem here is that there's no standard process for reporting, which in some cases has manifested as flight crews getting harassed or intimidated, and in other cases has resulted in them being ignored. So it's not even as simple as, oh, the Men in Black showed up and took all the tapes. You know, like we do hear about that happening sometimes. But we also hear about incidents like this where just like nobody seems to care, which is wild.
Yeah.
So yeah, they really hammered the point that like, because of this stigma, because of the lack of a process, we end up in an unsafe situation where we're ignoring unknown craft in our airspace. No matter what you think this is, no matter what you think is going on, that's a bad place for us to be in. Nobody can argue with a straight face. Yeah, there's stuff up there and we don't care about it. It seems, reading between the lines, like the Air Force and the Navy and all the groups that have investigated UFOs over the years have come to the conclusion that they're not hostile and we can't do anything about them. So we're just going to ignore them.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that the whole thing about tilting at windmills? Like there's no point.
Right. So yeah, he got some great questions. He was asked, they were all asked, but he gave the most detail. If UAP could pose a potential national security threat. And he said, yes. And here's why. The technology that we faced was far superior to anything that we had. And you could put that anywhere. If you had one that you captured, that you reverse engineered and you got it to work, you're talking about something that can go into space, go somewhere, drop down in a matter of seconds, do whatever it wants and leave. And there's nothing we can do about it. Nothing.
That is like, that is seriously like actually kind of terrifying. I'm thankful that they don't seem to have any inclination to destroy us, but like, yeah.
If anything, I'm less worried about, quote unquote them, because, if they wanted to do something, they probably would have done it by now. I'm more worried about like, and I suspect this is how the military feels about it also, that Russia or China is going to reverse engineer them first and have this massive asymmetrical advantage and the war is over before it's begun. I don't want that to happen. I don't love that we're on the brink of war all the time. I don't love that we're thinking proactively about which of our enemies might get it first, but I get why that would terrify people, especially in the military, where your job is to think about how do we defend against threats. And, I will repeat this again. We've said this before. A lot of people respond badly to the word threat. There are a lot of people in the community who feel very strongly that they are not hostile. I don't think there's enough information to say one way or another, but even if that is how you feel, Lou Elizondo gave a really good analogy. He said, threat is not the same thing as hostile. If I wander out onto a runway while a jet is taking off and I stand in the backwash of that jet, I'm going to have a real bad time. That is absolutely a threat to me.
Sure.
It's not hostile. The jet's not doing it on purpose. It's my own fault. I wandered into where I shouldn't have been, but it is absolutely a threat. And our job is to understand and respond to threats. Sure. So I just like to make that point whenever somebody throws around the word threat, because I know there's somebody out there like, Another question directed at Fravor was to clarify how these objects differ from our current technology. And he said, well, We have nothing that can stop in midair and go back the other direction, nor do we have anything that can come down from space, hang out for 3 hours, and then go back up.
Oh man, if we did, that would be fabulous.
Right?
I got some serious plans we could do if we had that.
Yeah. But, like, again, I think this quote is worth including because a lot of people, I think, assume that what we're dealing with here, right? Occam's razor. The simplest answer is this is some Black Ops program.
Sure, right.
This is some fancy new stealth fighter that we've developed that's top secret. You're asking for a pretty big technological leap. Like, we're not just talking fast and stealthy. We're talking able to do things that don't seem like they should be possible. Like a complete 180 in the air at speed without having to like do a loop. That's a big deal. Being able to drop from orbit and just hang motionless in space for hours. Like, I don't know what the flight time of an F-18 is, but I know it's not 3 hours motionless.
Right. Yeah. And if we did have this, let's be honest, we would use it.
Exactly. And related to that idea, later in the hearing, one of the congresswomen asked him, she said, so many people dismiss UAP reports as classified weapons testing by our own government. But in your experience as a pilot, does our government typically test advanced weapons systems right next to multi-million-dollar jets without informing our pilots? And Fravor just kind of chuckled. He said, no, we have testing ranges for that.
Of course. Yeah.
And
why would you shoot like experimental weapons next to your pilots? Like, that's crazy.
Yeah. Now, you left a note in here responding to her using the word classified weapons testing. I would encourage you to replace weapon testing with like flight test or something like that. The story that I've heard
so
that
they
I
could
find
be
the
like
most
flares
compelling
or something
is
like that.
Imagine that we have developed a next generation stealth technology. And we've done all the testing out at Nellis that we can do. The argument is the best detection system in the world is installed in our carrier groups. So where do you go to test it? Well, you try to do a flyby of our own guys and see if they notice you.
Okay.
I understand why people would go to that. I understand why it is an appealing theory. But again, we have heard over and over and over from the people in the military, no, that is an insane way to do testing. No one does that. We are very clear with each other when we are doing testing. Those things happen in particular areas for a reason. You certainly don't go out and surprise pilots flying multi-million-dollar jets and almost trigger midair collisions. Like, what could you possibly be testing by hovering motionless at a GPS coordinate that two pilots have to fly through?
Right. Yeah. Nothing. But also, you would hate to get the report back like, hey, did you detect us at this time? Like, no, we weren't paying attention. Like, that's we just wasted a lot of money.
Yeah.
All
right. So I think we've covered our Navy pilots. There were some interesting details in there. I'm glad we talked about it, but definitely this is stuff we've heard. We've already done an episode on the Nimitz. This is a topic the community has thought a lot about. I'm glad they brought it up to Congress. I'm glad Congress was taking it seriously. But let's be honest, the real meat of the hearing was always going to be David Grusch, the UFO whistleblower. So I've got a brief kind of recap of what he said here, because he phrased a few things in a particular way that I think is worth talking about. He says, I was an intelligence officer for 14 years, most recently at the GS-15 civilian level, which is the military equivalent of a full bird colonel. Now, I included this quote not because I know what it means, but because I didn't know what it meant, and someone on Reddit helpfully posted an explanation.
Awesome.
Not being a military brat, I have a hazy understanding of rank to begin with. And this guy said, in the Army, Air Force, and Marines, an 05 is a lieutenant colonel. Grusch is the equivalent of one rank higher, an 06, which is also called a colonel. They're referred to as full bird colonels because they wear eagles as a rank insignia instead of the silver oak leaves worn by lieutenant colonels. So what does that mean? This is a very senior rank that takes dedication, ability, and political savvy to achieve. In the military, a full bird colonel is the highest you can go without being a flag officer like a general or an admiral. In civilian levels, GS 15 is the highest rank before SES, which is the civilian equivalent of a flag officer. I had never heard it put that way. Knowing that Grusch wasn't just high ranking, but was like the civilian equivalent of one step below a general or an admiral, it kind of recontextualized it for me. Like I knew he was a high ranking career guy, but that really clarifies it. You don't get to those ranks lightly. You don't get to those ranks without having been challenged, showing your dedication, proving your worth. You know, this wasn't some guy who was rolling in, making up stories. He was demonstrably reliable, or he would not have achieved this rank.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like this write-up. That's super helpful. I kind of wonder if it's like the step right before, I don't know, in for-profit, if it's like the step right before the C-suite. Like, which I don't know anything about either.
So the link is in the show notes. You should check it out. Basically, he goes on to talk about the number of people under your direct command at these ranks, and that, you know, someone at this rank would have thousands of people reporting to them.
Oh, wow.
Like it is a high rank. David Fravor was a lieutenant colonel. Now that I'm saying that, I don't know if I'm right. Never mind.
Right.
Anyway, the link is in the show notes. There's a little more detail there, but the takeaway for me was just, I knew he was high rank. I didn't know he was like one step below admiral or general. That's a big deal.
Yeah, for sure.
So this is his like short version of his whistleblower testimony. I became a whistleblower following concerning reports that the U.S. government is operating with secrecy above congressional oversight with regards to UAPs. My testimony is based on information I have been given by over 40 individuals with a long-standing track record of legitimacy and service to this country, many of whom also shared compelling evidence in the form of photography, official documentation, and classified oral testimony. I have taken every step I can to corroborate this evidence over a period of 4 years and do my due diligence on the individuals sharing it. I think that's a really good summary of it, because a lot of people are like, oh, he just heard a story from one person, made it up. No, over 4 years, over 40 qualified, reliable individuals, and he checked them out and followed up on this. This wasn't I heard one guy say he saw a UFO and I quit my job and I went public with it.
Yeah, right. Okay.
He says, in 2019, the UAP task force director tasked me to identify all special access programs and controlled access programs. He kind of glossed over this, but he means related to UAPs. At the time, due to my extensive executive-level intelligence support duties, I was cleared to literally all relevant compartments and in a position of extreme trust in both my military and civilian capacities. I was informed, in the course of my official duties, of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program to which I was denied access. I made the decision, based on the data I collected, to report this information to my superiors and to multiple inspectors general, and, in effect, become a whistleblower.
Wow.
Right? Yeah, he didn't do this lightly. You know, here's a guy with the qualifications, with the access, with everything he is supposed to have. He's hearing from multiple people, And the way he described it in the interview, he said literally, I knocked on the door and was denied access.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
on paper, he shouldn't be.
yeah, it sounds like it sounds like this was big enough deal that like he made his choice that this was going to be the end of his career.
Yeah. Well,
It's pretty
and
nuts.
I forget how old he is. He's in his 30s. He's
What?
not a guy who's at the end of his career.
Yeah.
Like he had a full career ahead of him, and he walked away from it.
Yeah, and especially if you're like if you're going to get into general. He might have been coming up close to his 20-year mark, though.
Yeah. So I've broken this out into a few topics because obviously they all had a lot of questions for him, and they were coming kind of scattershot because, okay, we'll call on Representative Burchett. Now we'll call on Representative Luna, and, they might ask related questions. So I've kind of grouped some things together here to make it easier to talk about. The first thing I want to talk about is allegations of reprisals, both against Grusch and against other whistleblowers. They asked him whether he had suffered any reprisals, and he said he couldn't discuss it because it was an ongoing investigation, but, quote, it was very brutal and very unfortunate, some of the tactics they used to hurt me, both professionally and personally. I do have knowledge of active planned reprisal activity against myself and other colleagues. Certain colleagues were brutally administratively attacked. I call it administrative terrorism. That is a tool in their toolbox to silence people, especially career government service people who care about their career, care about their clearance, their reputation, want to climb the ladder. When you threaten that career path, a lot of people back off.
Yeah.
Another congressperson asked him, have you had incidents that caused you to fear for your life? He said, yes. Several Congress people at this point chimed up and made it clear that harassing witnesses and threatening whistleblowers is unacceptable. Now, that sounds like kind of a nothing burger, right? Like, isn't that the bare minimum? Like, oh, that sucks that happened to you. No one should harass whistleblowers. But I want to hammer that point home a little bit. They were asking him about reprisals. They were asking him about death threats. They were asking him about, things that are happening to whistleblowers.
Yeah.
We have heard repeatedly from Ross Coulthart, from Leslie Kean, from other reporters, that there are other whistleblowers in the wings, whistleblowers with firsthand knowledge of the program, who are waiting to come forward until they see how the current whistleblowers are being treated.
Right.
This was a test, and Congress needed to pass it. They needed to show, we got your back.
Yeah, right.
It is illegal for this to happen, and we're going to look into it. And they did. Now, that's a low bar to clear. I don't want to pat them on the back too much, but I do think it is worth noting. My understanding is that was kind of a big deal, that everybody's waiting to see how is Congress going to respond to the idea that whistleblowers are being threatened. And they were unequivocal. This is not acceptable.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's especially scary because he was literally just doing the job he was asked to do, which is wild.
Yeah. Absolutely wild. Yeah. And we talked about this in our episode on him, but as a reminder for anybody who's kind of coming to this fresh, Grusch didn't seek out the limelight. He didn't start by going to the press. He found evidence of something being done improperly, and he took it to the DOD Inspector General. He did the right thing he's supposed to do. He went through his chain of command and said, hey, I uncovered a program that's breaking the law. He suffered some reprisals as a result of that, and he went to the Intelligence Community Inspector General and filed a whistleblower reprisal complaint talking about the fact that he went whistleblower to the DOD Inspector General and suffered reprisals. The ICIG investigated, found it credible and urgent, and referred that to Congress. It was only at that point that Grusch decides to quit and go public because he lost faith in the system. We now know that behind the scenes, he was working with Congress to help craft whistleblower protection, stuff that wasn't available to him. So this is not like, oh, obviously whistleblowers would be protected. The ink is still wet on the paper that says you're not allowed to do this. So it wasn't just like, is Congress going to stand up for it? Like, they just passed this law. How serious are they about it? So hopefully what we're going to see now is more whistleblowers coming forward because they were able to respond to Grusch's allegations.
Yeah, I also think it's important to recognize that like Grusch didn't go into this seeking UAPs. He came in just as like a general intelligence guy. And they asked him to look at SAPs. And so he did. And it happens that they were about UAPs.
Right. And he was clear. We talked about this in our earlier episode on him, that he was not primed to believe. Yeah. He was extremely skeptical of what he was hearing. And it took, we now know, 40 corroborating witnesses who he's speaking to independently. Yeah. Like, if he's being lied to, the scope of the operation to convince him is kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah. I've heard that so I wonder if he had been in intelligence for 14 years. I've heard that at the 20-year mark, you kind of either need to retire or make general. And if he was only 14 years in and he was already a colonel, I think he was headed there. So
sure sounds that way.
I bet that he didn't quit to become a whistleblower, but quit because it was very clear that there was no chance of that anymore. And that's because a super duper bummer. Yeah. Because he should have been a general.
And it aligns with what we were hearing from Admiral Wilson, right? Admiral Wilson was told, if you don't drop this, you're not going to get your promotion to the role that you want in the intelligence community, and you're going to lose a couple stars along the way. That's a big deal to someone at the end of their career. You know, that affects your pension, that affects your retirement, that affects your legacy. Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, it ends it too. Like, yeah.
Okay. Now, I hesitated to include this next bit because it feels more about politics. Like Chuck was saying, get to the UFOs, man. But I think this is important to talk about. So a few people asked him about AARO. For those who are relatively new to the topic, AARO is the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. It is the investigative body set up in the DoD at the demand of Congress. It is extraordinarily controversial. There is lots of evidence that the Pentagon is dragging their feet, perhaps even intentionally crippling AARO's ability to investigate. We have heard over and over again that whistleblowers don't trust AARO because currently AARO is in the chain of command under Ronald Moultrie. Ronald Moultrie is the guy that was causing all the whistleblower complaints around Lou Elizondo back when he quit. Okay. So the fact that this guy is still in the chain of command, and not just still in chain of command, but in the chain of command against the direct orders of Congress, who made it very clear AARO should report directly to the Deputy SecDef. Like I said, I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but there is a reason that whistleblowers are distrustful of AARO.
Yeah.
So it's natural that here's our big UAP whistleblower. People would ask him about AARO. Representative Fox asked about AARO's statement saying that they had no verifiable evidence of extraterrestrial stuff. David Grusch replies, that is not accurate. I believe Dr. Kirkpatrick mentioned he had about 30 individuals that have come to AARO thus far. A few of those individuals I also interviewed, and I know what they provided, Dr. Kirk. And then she cuts him off.
Okay.
This is, of anything he was saying, the answer I was perhaps most interested in. And she cuts him off and launches into a rambling, self-gratifying statement, a prepared statement about, I don't even know what. And like this was the one moment where it felt like politics as usual reared its ugly head. She cut him off and goes, I only have so much time, and then uses all of her time to make this statement and then stops talking to him. And unfortunately, nobody else picked it up. Like if I was one of the other Congress people, I would have been like, can we go back to what she said?
Yeah, right.
Now, we didn't get the full statement from Grusch, but reading between the lines, what he appears to be saying is Kirkpatrick doesn't have the full story. The people he has talked to were not the ones who had the inside knowledge. So when Kirkpatrick says, I've talked to 30 individuals and I've found no evidence, well, yeah, you talked to the 30 people who didn't have knowledge. And remember, Grusch's whole claim is that this thing is being inappropriately hidden, and he himself was denied access at a time, I'll point out, when he had more clearances than Sean Kirkpatrick. Right. So anyway, it's kind of a big deal that Arrow keeps harping on about, we have found no verifiable information of the whistleblower's claims, when the whistleblower's claims are, Arrow won't be in a position to find that evidence. Someone else later asks, you stated that you briefed Sean Kirkpatrick on information you were uncovering. Were the items you divulged to him pertinent to national security? Now, before I get to his answer, I want to take a moment to appreciate that question. Grusch has said, I spoke to Sean Kirkpatrick. Now, he is clear in the interview, this was not an official interview. This was, Sean and I travel in the same circles. Before he took over Arrow, I sat down and shared with him some of what I was learning. And what he said in the interview is, Dr. Kirkpatrick never followed up with me, and I don't know why. It seems crazy to me that he wouldn't have.
But now, so putting it in the case of like, was it pertinent to national security? Now it makes Kirkpatrick look like he's hiding something.
And remember, that's what this subcommittee is about. It's about national security. The House Oversight Committee, specifically on national security. They're like, so when you say you talked to the guy, was it about national security? This time they let him answer. Grusch says, yes, he and I had a classified conversation in April of 2022 before he took over Arrow, and I provided him with some concerns I had. I wish he had followed up with me. I was happy to give counsel to him on where to look when he took the helm. Now, that was it. They moved on from that point. The whole reason I'm sharing this exchange is because this morning I got up and checked the UFO Reddit to see if anything had come up. And, Sean Kirkpatrick posted on LinkedIn. Now, first of all, why LinkedIn, Sean? It's not a public post, but it's also not a private post. Like, it's open to people who are friends with him. Presumably he is friends with 1 million people in the intelligence community. Probably. So this got out there very quickly, and they were very quickly able to confirm that, yes, this was actually Sean wrote this. I'm not even going to bother quoting from it. To be perfectly honest with you, it'll be linked in the show notes. You can go read it. It is a bunch of whining. It really kind of upset me. His point, to the extent that he had one, is that Arrow was treated very poorly in the hearing.
Well,
but nobody really talked about Arrow in the hearing. There were really 2 points that it came up. One was in one of their opening statements, someone mentioned that Arrow's budget itself is classified, which prevents Congress from having meaningful oversight of Arrow. And then there were the questions directed at Sean Kirkpatrick about Arrow, but nobody at any point was like, boy, Arrow's really dropping the ball on this.
Right.
Like, nobody was bad-mouthing Arrow, so I don't know where that came from.
Okay.
But there was one quote he made that I think is worth noting. He said, contrary to assertions made in the hearing, the central source of those allegations has refused to speak with Arrow. Furthermore, some information reportedly provided to Congress has not been provided to Arrow, raising additional questions about the true commitment to transparency by some congressional elements.
What?
Oh, good God. The level of passive aggression.
Yeah, right.
Ripping off of this. I don't want to touch it. But he goes out of his way to slam some elements of Congress for not sharing. And he says the central source of those allegations. So he does not name Grusch by name, but it is almost impossible for me to think of any way to interpret that other than the central source of these allegations is David Grusch. Maybe he means someone else. Maybe he's giving himself wiggle room to avoid being slapped on the hand when someone's like, you can't go after Grusch. But like, he's talking about Grusch, and he explicitly says refused to speak to Arrow.
That doesn't sound like Grusch.
Now, it doesn't sound like Grusch, and also refused strongly implies that he was invited. But Dr. Kirkpatrick doesn't say that. He only implies it. Now, we don't have the information. And a lot of people I saw online are saying, well, clearly either Kirkpatrick or Grusch is lying. They can't both be telling the truth. You and I have gotten pretty good at this over the last few weeks, interpreting Pentagon statements. I think this is the same kind of thing. I think it is entirely possible that both of these statements are true from a certain point of view. Grusch says, I spoke to Kirkpatrick before he took over. And Grusch is actively suffering reprisals for talking to people. We have heard over and over again that whistleblowers don't trust Arrow. So when Arrow says, you can come talk to us, Grusch may very well be one of the people who's like, no, I don't trust you to protect me from Ronald Moultrie. Kirkpatrick says Grusch refused to speak to Arrow. If your stance is, I issued an open invitation and he didn't take me up on it, therefore that's a refusal, that's one way to interpret it. But I want to stress, we are reading between the lines on both statements. I would love to find out more about what the hell is going on here. But just looking at the surface level, what I see David Grusch saying is, I will tell you anything in a secure facility. I am following the law. I'm doing everything I can to get this information out here. And what we have seen from Kirkpatrick at the best of times is an unwillingness to follow through. Like, we have spent a lot of time defending Kirkpatrick on this and talking about how he's stuck between a rock and a hard place. And to the best that we can tell, he's genuinely trying to do good science. But it is hard to ignore that he has been very clear that he does not consider witness testimony to be verifiable data, which is an insane stance to take. So I don't know, but I will say I am very strongly inclined to believe this is Sean Kirkpatrick throwing mud, and Grusch hasn't done anything wrong on this. But who knows? I don't actually have the inside.
We'll have to read LinkedIn for more details. Apparently,
I'll get right on that. My favorite social network. So let's get to the meat of it, right? The reason everyone came here, the UAP whistleblower. Let's ask him about UAPs. So I'm going to kind of rapid fire go down a few questions he was asked. Mr. Grusch, is the government in possession of UAPs? Answer, absolutely. Based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years. I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General, and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with firsthand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General.
What?
I want you to enjoy that answer, because that is the clearest answer you're going to get out of Grusch.
What is
night. He is unequivocal.
What is a protected disclosure? Do you know?
I assume testifying in a secure facility as a whistleblower where you're not supposed to suffer reprisals, but I don't actually know. Mr. Grusch, have you personally seen spacecraft? Answer, I have to be careful describing what I've seen firsthand and not in this environment, but I could answer that question behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Mr. Grusch, do we have the bodies of UAP pilots? Answer, non-human biologics came with some of these recoveries. That was the assessment of people with direct knowledge of the program that I talked to that are currently still in the program. Right. Mr. Grusch, have you seen the bodies? I have not. Mr. Grusch, has our government made contact with extraterrestrials? Answer, I cannot discuss that in a public setting.
Oh my God. That's not even I can neither confirm nor deny. It's just like, no, that's
right. And it's worth noting. Have you seen bodies? I have not. Do we have UFOs? We do. Have you seen UFOs? I can't tell you that in public. Have we made contact? Ooh, I can't answer that question.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, he is not answering the question. The strictest legal definition, we don't know the answer, but context clues, man. There is an answer here that he can't share publicly.
God. That is wild.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, that is about all we got out of him. His claims have been well recorded. He, in his, and he actually referenced the Congress people back to his News Nation interview. Because he didn't have time to get into all the details. But as a reference for anybody who's there, he's been very clear that there is a multi-decade US-based crash retrieval and reverse engineering program that has been illegally hidden from Congress and from the public. And one of the claims he made was that it goes back to the 1930s. Now, most people regard the modern UFO era as beginning in 1947. Summer of the Saucers, Roswell, all of that. Grusch has made the claim that a UFO crash landed in fascist Italy during World War II, and we retrieved it, in the 30s, and that we retrieved it at the end of World War II when the fascist government collapsed because the Vatican reached out and gave us the intel, and the U.S. went in and recovered it. So that is one of the wilder claims. My coworker Jason shared a note, historically, people who claim conspiracies involving the Vatican are not the most reliable sources. I don't disagree. It is a big, weird, wild claim. We have almost no details on it, but the main thing is what Grusch is saying is this is not recent. This is not small scale. We have multiple crafts. Someone else spoke to some of his witnesses. We've heard the number 12 recovered crafts. Some wrecked, some crashed, some recovered intact. We have heard there are bodies that have been recovered. These are big claims. And obviously Congress is viewing them mostly through the lens of our secrets being improperly kept from Congress. And I think that's the right step for them to take. But Grusch's claims are pretty big. So while he didn't get to confirm or deny a lot in this hearing, if you're interested at all, please go watch his News Nation interview, go read the article in the debrief by Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal. His claims are really, they're exciting stuff. Now, the last thing that I want to share from David Grusch is people were asking him questions about the cover-up, because that's another part of his thing is there's been a secret Cold War going, and the secret has been kept, meaning there has been a cover-up and improper actions have been taken to keep the secret. Mr. Grusch, do you have any personal knowledge of people who have been harmed or injured in efforts to cover up or conceal these extraterrestrial technology? Answer: yes, personally. Mr. Grusch, have you heard of anyone being murdered? Answer: I have to be careful answering that question. I directed people with that knowledge to the appropriate authorities.
Yeah.
Oh, that's another non-denial. Which, again, this is something, the UFO community has quote unquote known for years, that witnesses are at best discredited and at worst disappeared. Mr. Grusch, has UAP activity caused harm to humans? Now, I'm going to tell you up front, he doesn't answer this question, but the way he doesn't answer it is wild. I can't get into the specifics in an open environment, but at least the activity that I personally witnessed, and to be very careful here because you don't know, they tell you never to acknowledge tradecraft. So what I personally witnessed myself and my wife was very disturbing.
What is his wife doing?
What? Now your wife's involved? And we're asking about, has UAP caused harm to humans? But earlier he's careful to say, I have to be careful whether or not I've seen UAPs. Yeah. absolutely wild. So there's a story involving his wife and UAPs and harm coming to humans, but no details.
What about his wife?
Okay. That's it. That was the whole thing. What I personally witnessed, myself and my wife, was very disturbing.
Huh.
Yeah, I don't know, man. When he was asked for the names of people with first-hand knowledge or locations of facilities, and by the way, a few people asked him this question, but one of them I want to give a shout out to was AOC, who asked it the most intelligent way. Where should I look?
Yeah.
But in all cases, he said, I can't discuss that publicly, but I did provide that information both to the intel communities and the inspector general. You may have noticed I can't discuss that in an open session is a pretty common answer from Grusch. The Congress people were picking up on it, and that theme that we talked about earlier of them being denied a skiff comes into play here, right? I can tell you this in a secure facility, but Congress was denied access to a secure facility.
Yeah.
Last quote from Grusch. Later in the hearing, someone else tried coming at the question a little differently and asked, who should we call in the next hearing? He said, I can give you a specific cooperative and hostile witness list of specific individuals who were in those programs.
All right. I love it.
Oh my God. I love that he's not just, I can give you names. I can give you cooperative and hostile witnesses. You want the hostile ones? Here you go.
I mean, that is a really important info to know when you're trying to uncover stuff.
It really is. Yeah. So before I get to the reactions, we've been through our 3 big witnesses and the questions asked to them. What do you think, man? It was a lot, right?
It's wild. Like, I feel like there was a lot of new stuff that came out, which is very exciting.
Yeah. And, naturally, I focused my notes on the things that were newer to us. But, there was some new information here. This was not a nothing burger by any stretch.
How are you feeling?
Oh, I'm pumped, man. And these next few quotes that I'm going to share, I think, kind of get to how I'm feeling about it. I really strongly feel that this is step 1, and what we're seeing is the snowball coming down the mountain that's going to turn into the avalanche.
I hope so.
Like, this particular snowball might not be the thing you were waiting for,
but it's coming.
It's starting the ball rolling, man. Yeah, it's coming. So first of all, immediately after the hearing, as far as I can tell, the press was racing out to interview all the Congress people. Moskowitz, Burchett, and Luna all gave statements. And they said that, first of all, so they shared 2 really interesting bits. They said, first of all, the House Oversight Committee is working to have Grusch provide them with the classified info that he provided to the Intelligence Community Inspector General. Specifically, the locations of non-human craft in U.S. possession. I think this is important to note. This was a question that Chris UFO Daddy Mellon said that they should ask him, that they should get the ICIG in and put the question directly to them. What did you learn from Grusch?
And presumably, what have you learned after learning all that stuff from Grusch?
Yeah. Absolutely. So it's encouraging to hear that they're taking that seriously and saying they're going to take that step. Also, and perhaps more notably, Matt Gaetz, as well as Burchett, Luna, and Moskowitz, brought up this idea. They are pushing for the establishment of a select committee on UAP with the power to subpoena information. Now, we don't know exactly what that means, but we have been hearing rumors for quite a while that the way this is going to end is with a church commission style hearing. I don't know what that means. That we're going to need. So this was around the CIA abuses. There was a big investigation into what they were doing and whether it was legal or illegal. And like I said, that led to the oversight communities that we have now. But, this idea of, rather than doing the investigations in the National Security Committee or the Oversight Committee or any of the existing committees starting a specific select committee with the explicit task of looking into this and giving them subpoena power. That's a big deal. That's a big step in the direction of maybe doing a church committee type thing where we're able to demand that people come in and testify under oath and give the information. I think it's a very positive step. Now, of course, at the moment it's all talk, but I think there's a lot of indication, both because of how they were talking in the hearing and also how they were talking afterwards. Congress ain't dropping this.
They're just getting started. They're getting excited. They've got a lot of press. Yeah, they're not dropping it now.
Mm-hmm. Now, I had a bunch of quotes in here that I ended up cutting because we're already an hour and a half in and we haven't even finished. Lou Elizondo and several other people, including Chris Mellon, all put out statements in support of David Grusch. We've seen an outpouring of support from other people in the community toward him. But Chris Mellon dropped a quote in an interview on News Nation that in any other week would be like one of our major topics tonight. And this week is just like a little blip. Chris Mellon, quote, "I've been told that we have recovered technology that did not originate on this earth by officials in the Department of Defense and by former intelligence officials."
What?
Now, this is exactly what Grusch is saying, right? But this is Chris Mellon saying it and saying that he's heard it from multiple sources. So he's not just saying, Grusch told me.
Yeah, right.
He's heard it from other people also. And Chris Mellon, for those of our listeners who are just joining us, unfortunately I didn't write down what his former job title was, but he's a big deal. He's a big name. He's heavily involved in the lobbying community. He has been an active driver of this process behind the scenes. And if anybody in the government is well informed on this topic, it is Chris motherfucking Mellon. And when he comes out and echoes Grusch's claims, not just saying I believe Grusch, not just saying Grusch is credentialed and a believable person, but explicitly saying I've heard the same thing, I take that pretty seriously.
Yeah. Do you want to know his old title?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense, or of Defense for Intelligence.
I know. He has the most complicated title.
I don't know why you don't remember this. It's so catchy.
He was very high up in the government. I've got a couple of quotes here from people talking about the reaction to Grusch that I think were really helpful. First of all, Sean Cahill says, quote, "I think a lot of people have mischaracterized Mr. Grusch as a witness. I would say more accurately, first, he was the investigating officer, and second, he was the complainant in a whistleblower investigation. If we make the comparison to a law enforcement investigation, to say that because he was not a direct witness of perhaps a craft or bodies or experience, is like saying that a district attorney is not enough to prosecute a case because they weren't present at the scene of the crime the moment the crime happened. It's a fallacy that's being used to remove and erode his authority."
Nice.
I think that's a really important point. Like so many people are, he doesn't have firsthand knowledge.
Right,
He doesn't have firsthand knowledge. Well, the other quote here is really relevant. Someone on Reddit said, people keep saying Grusch only has secondhand knowledge, but wasn't that his job? Like, he was an intelligence analyst for 14 years. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't his entire career revolve around analyzing and determining the veracity of secondhand information?
That's a really good point.
So yeah, I think that we do him a little bit of a discredit when we refer to him as a witness or talk about how he doesn't have firsthand testimony. Like, he was the guy that investigated this, and he's coming to us with his concludings. This is what he did his entire military career. This is what he was trained for, and he was really freaking good at it by all evidence. And by his rank, we can tell he was not a nobody. He wasn't some schmuck who looked into this and heard a rumor. This was a guy at the peak of his career who took 4 years and interviewed over 40 direct witnesses and has come out and conclusively said, yes, the U.S. government is holding UAPs.
Yeah. Wow.
I can tell I've kind of gotten to the end of your ability. Yeah,
because I'm just like, I don't have words left. I'm done.
All right. Well, let me wrap up with a few quotes from Kelly Chase. I don't recommend a lot of podcasts, but if anyone out there is interested in the topic and wants more UAP stuff in a similar vein to what me and Chuck do, I cannot recommend her podcast, The UFO Rabbit Hole, enough. I made Annie listen to the first episode when it came out. Kelly Chase is a person who was raised in science as a, liberal thinker, and came to this topic very late in life and very reluctantly. She said the same kind of thing as Ross Coulthart did. Like, she came to this expecting it to be nothing, expecting to kind of like dig into this and find out it was nothing. And instead, here she is X number of years later running an award-winning podcast and writing books on the topic. She has a very, very good approach. And more importantly, the thing that I think is important, the thing that I think we bring to this topic and why I'm comfortable recording a podcast is she's excited about it.
Awesome.
I think a lot of people in this community tend to be a little jaded, right? Sure, it attracts conspiracy-minded thinkers. And the thing Chuck and I try to emphasize is like, hey, it's a very exciting time. This is right? This is a big deal. We're about to find out UFOs are real and aliens are real. And I want to know more about this. So she brings a similar vibe. Anyway, she had a few quotes on Twitter that I think were worth repeating here in full. So she was kind of responding to common arguments that you see in the community. So first question she responded to was, all we have are stories. Why aren't we seeing the evidence? And her response was, blunt, but, it's the truth. Because it's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
There is no legal mechanism for classified information to be shared directly with the public. What we need is legislation, which was just introduced by Schumer in the Senate, to demand that this information be declassified so it can be shared with the public.
Yeah.
And Grusch is very clear about this. I can't talk about that in an open hearing. He can only talk about this to people who are cleared for the information. Right. That is another reason why Grusch is credible, is even now, when he has turned his back on the government, he's taking his oaths seriously. Right, and it's not just because he's a patriot. Also, he'll go to jail if he doesn't. But you know what I mean? Like, there is no legal mechanism to share classified info. And right now, as we talked about, all of this is classified, improperly, overclassified, however you want to talk about it. But at the moment, there is zero mechanism to bring it to public.
Yeah.
Next question. Why haven't we heard from first-hand witnesses of the alleged crash retrieval programs? And she says, because they are allegedly being intimidated and retaliated against. It was crucial in this hearing that Congress signal that they are going to aggressively enforce the whistleblower legislation passed in December, and they did. And the fact that she includes passed in December, I think, is important. It's only July. Like, I said earlier, like, the ink is still wet on this bill.
Right.
Like, the whistleblower legislation is brand new. And at the time when Grusch was talking to Congress, it did not exist.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's part of the reason he's suffering reprisals. That's why he worked with Congress, was to make it easier for other people to come out without having their careers jeopardized, without getting death threats. And I'll close here with Kelly's last point. She says, one of the key takeaways from this hearing is that the popular debunker narrative, specifically that this whole UFO thing is just a case of a few unscrupulous, superstitious grifters who somehow managed to bamboozle a few gullible and conspiracy-minded Congress people into believing and funding fairy tales. That narrative is no longer tenable. Grusch stated that he has interviewed 40 people with knowledge of these crash retrieval and reverse engineering programs, and that information has been handed over to the ICIG. He has also turned over the names of the programs and people involved, specific information about how these programs are being funded, specific locations where these materials are being kept. Representatives from both houses and from both sides of the aisle have seen enough to come together in a coordinated and bipartisan manner to investigate the issue with extreme urgency and on multiple fronts. It is clear that something real and of profound significance is going on here. And at this point, anyone who says otherwise is acting in bad faith or is in denial.
Oh, so good.
You know, sometimes you need to hear someone else say it.
Yeah.
Like, I agree with everything she said. I've believed that for a while now, but I could never have put it so eloquently. Like,
Right.
She nailed it. Like, that is a pernicious rumor, and you still see it in some of the mainstream reporting.
Absolutely.
They talk about conspiracy theories, and they talk about, oh, Congress is primed to believe conspiracy theories, and like, what we have seen, the facts that we do have in public do not support that.
Yeah.
We are not seeing a handful of grifters. We are seeing clear signs of something really, really big.
Yeah.
And again, not to hammer this point too much, Congress is taking it very, very seriously.
Yeah.
Oh, man. All right. Well, we've been recording for almost 2 hours. This might be one of our longest episodes ever. How are you feeling, Chuck?
I'm tired. I'm exhausted, frankly. But
You going to go edit this down to a tight 30 minutes?
I mean, soon. And no, I'm not going to edit it that far. That'd be amazing. No, what I'm going to go do is pick up a new dishwasher.
Nice.
Then I'm going to go edit it.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on It's a Very Exciting Time. You can find show notes and more on our website, veryexcitingtime.com, as well as links to our social media accounts.
And feel free to email us at Scott or Chuck at veryexcitingtime.com. And if you'd like to support the show, feel free to check out our Patreon at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime.
And Chuck, as always, my wife thanks you for listening to me talk about UFOs so she doesn't have to.